Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. All right, welcome to the podcast. I'm Bob Nickman. Got a great interview today with a gentleman named JAY Ponti. I was turned on to him by my friend Sonny Mayo, and thank you for that, Sonny. And we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff today. We're going to talk about Kriya Yoga, which Jay has studied for a number of years, and his the master that he studies with. Also, we're going to talk about all things about consciousness, meditation, the chakras, all these things that have to do with deep meditation and evolving as a human being. Jay is a very interesting guy. He spent a lot of years studying this stuff, traveled all around the world. He's got a lot of incredible information. We're going to talk about all that stuff. We're going to get into some past life stuff and how the mind works. I was fascinated with some of the information he has about how our minds work. And then we're going to get into some of the activism that he has participated in from Standing Rock and the pipeline there at Standing Rock to a thing called bank exit, which is about taking money out of big banks that are funding things like Standing Rock. So check this out. Jay is a really interesting guy and a very calming guy to talk to, which I really enjoyed about him. And this is it. This is JAY Ponti. Thanks for doing this. And I want to thank Sonny Mayo for turning me on to you. Sonny's helped me a lot with a variety of guests. I think you're the third or fourth guest he's introduced me to. So we're going to start with, Kriya Yoga, I think is probably the start of it for you in your meditation practice and your transformational coaching, and then into the activism that we're going to talk about later in the interview. So let's start with how you came to start doing this type of yoga and what your little background on you.
Great, thanks. And yeah, Sonny's great. It's been such a pleasure to work with him. There are people who I call, my rock star client, and it's really fun to actually have a rock star client who's a rock star client.
Yeah, that's right. He is an actual rock star.
So and yeah, he's really kicking ass. And yeah, Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga, for me, absolutely was where my life began. And I had a pretty interesting journey going through the trials and tribulations of, again, that aspiring rock star life. I played in a rock band for about 8 or 9 years, and I bought into the whole mythos of what it meant, in terms of my lifestyle, which meant sex, drugs, rock and roll. And that's, I thought, based on what I received from my culture, that was an important part of it.
That was success, coming up.
Yeah, and it turns out that's actually has more to do with writing material and successfully marketing it.
Yeah,
than taking drugs or drinking or anything like that. And so as a consequence of that lifestyle, I was in a lot of pain, and I really hit bottom with that entire lifestyle. And because of that pain, and because I had my entire model for living was turned upside down. And so much of the work that I do is based on, separating what is fact and what is belief, because so much of our lives is governed by our assumptions, the assumptions we make up as kids, what we get from our culture, from our family of origin, all of that. And what happens is it creates a context and a paradigm that ends up running us, in all sorts of ways. And so for me, I came to the point in 2005 where I realized that every assumption that I had made was, almost got me killed, led my body to be almost destroyed. And consequently, because I was in so much pain, I was willing to really go to any lengths to find, the peace that you read about in various books. And I was actually, a friend of mine named Ivana, who's an actress, and we were going sailing, and she talked to me about meditation. And I was actually on my old agent's boat, and she kept talking about meditation. And for some reason, I was in a place of openness, and I actually, I got my mind on it, and I started meditating. And the more I meditated, the better my life got, and
You start doing like a certain type of meditation?
Not really. In the beginning, it was just visualizing, and I sort of made up my own guided meditations, and things came to me. But I would start off with 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then. But what happened was, even in that 3 to 5 minutes was like an hour. Felt like an hour or 2 hours because my mind and emotions were so turbulent. But what happened is I noticed if I just got through that 3 to 5 minutes, the rest of my day started to flow. Parking spaces would open up. I wasn't forcing things. And then, as someone who likes stimulus and stimulation and, exciting things, I wanted more of it. And so I kept doing it more and more. And then all of a sudden I started attracting, I would show up at the airport, and there would be this great Buddhist Rinpoche, who's a lineage holder. And all these different beings started coming into my experience. And then eventually a mentor of mine named Bob Timmons introduced me to Self-Realization Fellowship and Kriya Yoga. And I read the book Autobiography of a Yogi, and I was hooked. I read that story, and that was it for me.
That the Self-Realization Fellowship, for those of you who don't know, is off of the PCH in Santa Monica, Malibu, kind of on the way up there. Yeah,
they actually, the remains of Gandhi are there. They actually have the last remains of Gandhi there.
Yeah, and if you've never been there, it is one of the most beautiful places. That lake is just so peaceful. So if anybody wants to if you're in Los Angeles, if you're not already, check it out. It's really a cool place.
And authentically, it is one of the most powerful spiritual centers in the country. It's what we refer to as a Siddha ashram, which is the ashram of a master. And you can find them a lot in India, but in America, they're not so hard to come by. And Yogananda was someone who initiated Mahatma Gandhi. And he was one of the people who he and Vivekananda really mainstreamed meditation, and they brought yoga and meditation. And then, of course, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi also did a lot of work in Yogi Bhajan to popularize it as well. But Yogananda was on the forefront.
I believe there's a documentary about him.
It's called Awake.
Yeah, I did watch that. I don't know if it's on Netflix.
It is. Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's really good.
Check that out, because it's a really interesting story of how he came here and how people responded to him.
Yeah. And then after some time, I had this intense desire not to just attend, this organization post-mortem after Yogananda's death, but I really, that book, Autobiography of a Yogi, is really about Yogananda's journey with his own master and guru, going through his own process of awakening. And that's what I wanted. I really craved that type of mentorship. And I actually, my daily prayer, a really intense prayer was, for my master to reveal himself. And then he did, about 6 months later.
Wow. Is that somebody who's still in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's his name is Himalayan Master Yogi Raj. And he actually is a disciple of Babaji, who if those of you who have read that book, or if you heard of it, Babaji's a great master, and he's a direct master of Babaji. So it's a very direct lineage. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, then it will require a little bit of research.
Yeah, I mean, that book has been around, so if people want to check that out.
Yeah, it was the only book that Steve Jobs had on his iPad, and George Harrison had a big box of them, and he would just hand them out. So George Harrison started with TM, and then eventually came over to practice Kriya.
And so you have taken that knowledge and that study and that work that you've done, and you've created something you're calling transformational coaching based on that. Is that, do I have that right?
Yeah, it's an enormous part. It's the basis for everything that we do. Ultimately, all of the modalities of transformation and psychology and all that, in my experience, it is really consciousness that does the real work. The real transformation happens because of consciousness. And we can muck around with the mind, the subconscious mind, which is important. It's important to, there's a practice in the Vedas called Swadhyaya. Swadhyaya means understanding the modalities of the subconscious mind. So that uncovering process, the uncovering process is really important to understand our past, understand our patterns, understand our beliefs, understand the things we made up, to get some sense of what's going on and how it's influenced our actions. And, once we uncover that in therapy or in, there's a lot of different transformational programs. I know people have done Landmark, things like that. But what ends up happening is people will have some breakthroughs, they'll have some forward progress, but it will be limited. And based on my 12 years of study with an enlightened Himalayan master and some of the occult principles, the esoteric principles and knowledge, that it is consciousness is what actually makes a transformation. Now, conversely, for me, I came to these transformational modalities. It was also very important for me because I was meditating and I was really disciplined in my meditation. And yet I hadn't gotten underneath some of the things that were still tripping me up, in terms of my life. So there was stuff, I think they say that there's, of our overall cognition, something like 95% is unknown to us.
I believe that.
Yeah. And
sometimes I'm surprised about what comes into my mind, and
right.
we'll talk about that in a second. Because let's do it now.
Sure, we can.
Because I said to you, I was talking about the monkey mind as I was setting up the equipment, and you said to me, I don't really have that anymore.
Mm.
That seems absolutely unbelievable to me.
And of course, what tells you that's not possible? Your mind. It goes, that's not possible.
Well, yeah, and
right?
and the way my mind works, I was talking to a friend of mine this morning. He says I was up till 5 a.m. He goes, I've done so much work on myself, and I do all this stuff. He goes, it's the one thing I can't do is I just some days I cannot shut down my mind, and it will tell me. Usually, it's for him. He said it's that I'm a failure. I'm not enough. It's never going to work out. It's all negative. It's never like I'm amazing.
Sure.
And those, tapes that run in there, some days we're better at sort of quieting that than others. And you're telling me that you've reached a point where that doesn't even come close to being a part of what goes on with you.
Yeah, if you go again, and according to the knowledge that's been passed to me by Yogi Raj, and this is also available if you read the ancient Vedic texts. There are 3 layers of mind. So if you can imagine an iceberg, right? And there was a little bit poking out of the water, right? That what's above the water, right? That's that 5%. Of cognition.
That's what everybody sort of sees. And
yeah, exactly. That's what
of.
You hear. That's the talking mind. That's the voices in your head. That's the committee, as they call it.
Yeah, the committee.
Mm-hmm. The committee.
Yep.
So that 5% we call vritti, which is the torrent of thoughts. I think Don Miguel Ruiz calls it the mitote, like the Incas or forgive me if I get his tradition wrong, but in South America they call it the mitote, it's the 1,000 voices, right? If you go below the waterline, the next layer down is called pratyay, which are the stored thought impressions of this life, which means that, mostly we come into, again, this isn't, no one's obligated to believe what I believe, take it, like my master's master, Babaji says, be like the wise ant that separates the grain of sugar from the grains of sand, so take what you like, leave the rest. But according to one school of thought, we come in and we're by grace, we don't have to remember the thousands of births previous to us. But we've been doing this for a really, 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 really long time. And so we're given a blank slate when we come in. You don't have to remember all of the baggage initially, from your past life, mm-hmm. right? So that's called pratyay. So in a lot of that conditioning, according to some schools of thought, our paradigm is set between the ages of 0 and 8, 0 to 10, something like that. So it means we come in as a blank slate, and then it's kind of like being thrown into a football game and you don't know what the rules are. And then we, based on what you observe in your family and life around you, we're these tiny little beings. We're trying to make sense of how to survive, how to live, and most of that is going to be based on what is told to us by adults, what we consume in terms of our media. It's going to be, it's transmitted to us, and it's what we make up about it. So that becomes the pratyaya, our traumatic experiences. And what happens is there's a line of code is sort of written in our program. A seed is planted in the mind, and it, you may have one experience and just make up, oh, I can't do anything right. It's not true like gravity is true, but you're just a little 5-year-old kid or 6-year-old kid. It's what you make up about it, and then that in turn creates our paradigm. It's the lens through which we see the world. And that ends up through, it's called heuristics. Heuristics is the conditioning of the mind, our biases, the same function that leads us to not have to learn how to tie our shoes every time. It creates a lens at which that 95% of our mind is driving us most of the time. And then there's the last layer is called samskara. So that's the stored thought impressions of our past lives. So it's sort of like if you, for some people, it's like an irrational fear of water or spiders or something like that. And to some degree, it could be, genetic, something in your genes that your ancestor, was bitten by a spider. But we also ascribe to the idea that you've had experiences in the past, like you may have had a death that was really painful and traumatic, and that impression stays with you.
Yeah, I remember reading this book, Many Lives, Many Masters, which is about doing past life regression.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, what you're just talking about, was in there. And I had, I actually did one in a hypnotherapy session. I think I've talked about it on another episode of this, but I was taken back, and I was in like an ancient kind of Mesopotamia type thing, and there was a war going on, and I was out in the middle of these people that were battling on horses with spears, and it was very violent, and I was really scared. I've always been really scared of violence, really scared of it. And I was out there telling them, this is not the way to do it. I was some sort of a writer of some kind. Now I became a writer, and that's what I do. That's my job. And I remember kind of thinking, like, when I came out of the thing after the hypnosis, and I was aware of what was going on while I was doing it. It wasn't anything magical. It was just sort of a deep meditation. That it was old. That I finally figured out why violence scared me. It was this thing. Mm-hmm. Now, whether it's real, not real, I don't know what that means. It was real to me in terms of an experience. So, I know a lot of people, they hear that kind of stuff and they go, that's just weird, but it felt like it was very genuine to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, think about it, even on a simple level. You ever met someone and instantaneously you either really intensely dislike them, or you feel like you've known them for their entire lives?
Isn't that strange? Like, I can't stand that guy. You don't even know him. I know. I don't like him.
And I think ultimately, the mind. We're talking about that mind. See, the thing is, we have a mind. The mind is meant to be a tool, but because of this culture here, we give so much importance to our mind. We listen to it all the time. And, the mind is, it craves things. It's constantly based on craving. So our mind is more and more conditioned the more we feed it. Okay. So that could be feeding it with negative thoughts, with positive thoughts. The mind tells you, I feel bad. I feel bad about this thing, and so I need something to make me feel better, whether it's drink or drugs or staying on social media, too long, or watching Netflix, or some people shop, some people gamble, whatever it is. So they're looking for that temporary relief, and what's happening is the mind itself gets more and more and more and more conditioned. Every time it tells you something, you listen to it, it gets stronger and stronger, and if you think about it, have you ever taken bad advice from your mind? Has your mind ever given you some bad advice?
Of course.
Right. And yet we give so much importance and power to it.
the idea is like, if I think it, it must be true.
Right.
Because I'm a smart guy.
And how many times has your mind given you an idea and you said, well, that seems like a pretty good idea. And then you do it and it turns out was not a great idea.
Right.
Right. So in the process of Kriya, and for me, Kriya is so important because it really gets to the root of the mind, which we believe is in the chakras. It's in the subtle body. So Kriya really gets down to the, I don't know of any other way to get down to that old samskars, the old past life stuff, and after a while, all these things will start to become apparent to you. Things that you didn't see, things that you didn't understand. Well, it's kind of like when you upgrade your OS, your operating system, hardware, software upgrade, you couldn't operate more advanced programs. And then all of a sudden you upgrade your hardware, and then you get all the way up to the NASA computers, right? So then it can run more advanced softwares where, it's kind of like that. What we are capable of as human beings is so incredible. I've spent the last 12 years traveling all over India and Nepal, meeting beings that have been meditating 24 hours a day for years. And what they can demonstrate is so remarkable, and you don't have to believe me. You go find it for yourself. My master, for instance, goes around the world, and he's done this at the United Nations. And he actually can put the entire audience into a state where your mind becomes completely still. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can actually go and experience it yourself. And some people who watch his videos get that experience as well. So, which he calls the Shivapat. So, but he does that not to show, according to him, he does that to show us what is possible through these ancient practices. That our evolution, which normally would take millions of years, can be compressed into a very short amount of time. And all of the masters, it's Buddha, Lao Tzu, Moses, all of the masters of all traditions are basically saying the same thing. And that all of us have the living spirit of the divine within us. All souls are the same, have the same potential. It's just the degree to which that's been expressed. And that's going to be commensurate with the level to which your kundalini is awakened, the extent to which your karma has been resolved, the level to which your mind is keeping you thinking that you're a tiny, separate, small being who has no power, or agency, or is disconnected from everything that is. Meanwhile, according to quantum physics, we know this is all just a big, giant ocean of electrons, and yet it seems very real to us.
Yeah. Wow. So he actually went to the United Nations and did like a meditation with.
Yeah, it's basically, you can see. I think it's on. It says it's online. I think
I got to watch that.
He's done it. I mean, I've been to those experiential satsangs so many hundreds of times, and it's really remarkable. Everybody gets it.
I wish that could stick with humanity and just be something that, I'm always wondering how, there's people that have attained a certain level of that ability to quiet their mind. Why is it that human beings as a species aren't able to do that in a mass way?
Well, I think that we're on our way. According to what I've been, there's a book that I actually helped work on. There's two books. One's called Wings to Freedom, and the other is called Babaji, the Lightning Standing Still, which are both on Amazon. And I was very blessed to be able to help edit and compile those for Yogi Raj, and working with him with that. But he talks about, we're in a transitionary phase, and humanity is evolving very fast right now. Now, it's a mixed bag. Because we're moving from one age, the old dark ages. There's 4 what are called yugas. We're moving out of the darkest age to the next stage up, which from the Kali to the Dwapara Yuga. And the Dwapara Yuga the Kali Yuga is really more about the lone enlightenment. The lone hero, the Buddha, the Christ. They go off and they do it because of the position of our galaxy, of our solar system in relation to the rest of the galaxy in the galactic center. It's kind of like a fire. The closer you move to the center, the more we're availing of a higher consciousness. When we move to the periphery, like when you move close away from the fire, it gets colder and darker, right? So we're moving in relation to that galactic center. We're moving closer in. And so you're seeing rapid evolution of consciousness, which is also reflected in our technology. So you have, you see a sharp, almost an exponential incline, right? And even if you think about the kids that are being born now, I remember when I used to play soccer, it was just like one giant clump of kids moving down the field. And if you watching 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds is actually fun now, and if you look at the technology, it's an expression of that evolution of consciousness. Now, in our culture, however, because there are people who have gotten the wrong perception that money is the point of existence, there's some people who've got that idea. And understand that the purpose of our journey on earth is to evolve and to evolve into what we really are, the divine self. But they've got the idea that money and power are the most important things, and so they go to extreme lengths to maintain their money and power, and convince others through advertising and through politics and media that it's called I think there's an Italian writer named Gramsci who calls it cultural hegemony. And so these corporations kind of take on a life of their own. And the idea is transmitted that, you are separate, you're alone, and you need to buy this thing to feel better. And
that's definitely where we're at now.
Yeah,
it feels more than ever, more than when I was a kid. Even it just seems like it's just pervasive and just on everything. Yeah, we've been
reduced to individual units that are separate and alone. And look at what's the most profitable company on, I think, Mac or Amazon. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. But think about it. It's a perfect expression of that. If you're alone and in your apartment, you don't have to leave. You don't have to commune with others. You
push a button, here it comes.
And here's your thing. And there's your thing. It's and there's the term for it, I think it's called atomization. But unfortunately, the earth realm, Mother Nature, however, never loses. She never loses. And because of that, because of her addiction to consumption and fossil fuels, like we're moving into we're in real dangerous waters. And so, we're at this transition point where we have the opportunity to make massive, massive leaps in evolution. Even 20, 30 years ago, even 5 years ago, yoga was considered something that was fringy and,
yes,
I was very blessed to be able to participate in that and help organize the meditation sync of 2012. And, I've been a part of that conversation, but you see the difference now, 10 years ago versus now, it's becoming a mainstream idea. It's becoming a mainstream idea. So we're on the precipice of this great group transformation. And, the question is now, will we make it? Really?
I always wonder about that myself. I don't know if I'll be around to see the result, but it feels like there was a quote you had on, I guess, I don't know if it was on something you sent me. It was a Margaret Mead quote. Do you remember it?
Yes. Never believe that a small group of people can't change the world. It's the only thing that ever has.
Yeah, I love that.
Small group of committed people.
Yeah. Right. Because I was talking to somebody about that, about how much, sort of negative and darker energy there is. And he was saying, yes, there are more people maybe that are like that, but the energy vibrates with this smaller group. It counteracts it and actually surpasses it by whatever amount. That's why we keep going forward.
That's really accurate, actually, based on the information I've been giving. Actually, one person practicing Kriya. By the way, this isn't to suggest that Kriya is the only path or the best path or the most path. It's the most powerful path I know of and the most suitable to living in the Western world and rapid evolution. Not to suggest it's the bestest or the mostest, but one person practicing Kriya can offset in terms of building up that light inside of their aura, we call it, their light in their body and their aura, can offset 10,000 people who are in abject materialism and suffering and addiction. So
Wow.
That's when Gandhi also practiced Kriya Yoga. So you read an autobiography of a yogi that Yogananda initiated Gandhi into that science, and when he was in prison, it's a lot of what he did. So when Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," that wasn't a passive statement. It really means that the transformation starts from within, and it will radiate out. That's been my experience too.
What is the I know it's probably hard to describe it into a microphone, but can you tell me a little bit about some specifics of Kriya Yoga that might be different than Hatha Yoga or other types of yoga?
Sure. Well, Hatha Yoga is a physical yoga, and there's 6 yogas. Hatha Bhakti, which is devotion, Raj Yoga, which is the kingly path, which is very much more like Kriya Yoga kind of fits into Raj Yoga. Then there's Laya Yoga, Jnana Yoga, which is the path of knowledge. Hatha Yoga, and we call it yoga. Yoga is actually asanas. Yoga,
right?
Really
that's what I've done
union.
when I've taken a yoga class.
Yeah, yoga isn't yoga. Like yoga, Western yoga really means asana practice. Asana means postural integration to get your body pliable so you can sit for meditation. It's the whole point. So Hatha Yoga is really concerned with purifying the body, because when you have a lot of impurities in the body, we consumed a lot of harmful substances into our body, and that's going to eventually bring about sickness. It's not going to let our this incredible machine that is the human body, that has the possibility to express God consciousness. It's one of the reasons that the human body is so special, is because it has the ability to express that, because of our nervous system, because of the way that we have evolved, or I mean, we can get weird into that conversation, but
sure.
The point is that
anytime.
the point is that it's a very special instrument. And if you're if you're suffering through a cancer or thing, it's very hard to focus on God. Although in some ways, when you have that pain, it's you're really focused on God. But it's difficult to perform what we call sadhana, or spiritual practice. In that time. So Hatha Yoga is great, and it's very complementary. There was a great avatar named Patanjali. Actually, Yogi Raj just put out a book on his commentary on that, but he called it is the Eightfold Path. And so the Eightfold Path to enlightenment is, you start off with your do's and don'ts. Don't judge. Non-stealing. And then talks about how we can be better people, and I mean that in a moralistic sense. It means in a way that's more in line with our soul. And then there's yam, niyam, asana, means then our postural integration, get a flexible body. Then is let's see, after this I want to say is pratyahar, which is when you meditate, all of a sudden your consciousness withdraws from the physical world, and you start to go inside. It actually, like a turtle pulls its head and legs into its shell, and then you start to go inside and see what's going on. Then dharana, which is concentration. So it means that my mind, the mind is like you ever walked a Great Dane, or you see someone walking a big dog, and the dog is walking them.
Yes.
Right. So they're getting taken for a ride. So if you think it's like, if you're sitting and trying to focus on the flame, if you're trying to meditate on the flame, you're thinking about the flame. You're like, okay, I'm meditating on the flame. I'm meditating on the flame. I'm meditating on the flame. I have to pick up my dry cleaning. God, I have to get my car. Oh, wait, okay. I'm meditating on the flame. I'm meditating on the flame. I'm meditating on the flame. God, boy, that guy was such a jerk when he cut me off. And so every time the mind goes off on its own, by bringing it back to the flame, you're training it, right? And eventually, when your concentration becomes perfect, eventually what happens in quantum physics, we call it, there's the subject-object barrier. If you study quantum physics, quanta has a dual nature, which is that of being a particle and a wave, right? What creates the particle is the quality of observation. So if a quanta is not being, or an electron is not being observed, it behaves as a wave. And if it is being observed, it behaves as a particle. What happens eventually, once the concentration becomes so perfect, you merge with the object of your meditation, of your concentration, and that the mind goes into a state which is called meditation or dhyan. And I know Yogi Raj has a number of videos where he explains all this. But that's a state. So people say like, oh, I meditate on my bike, and this is my meditation is my exercise. And that is in fact meditative, but it's the meditation itself is a state that happens when the mind starts to move into that wave consciousness, and you merge and you discover that you're not separate. You go from object, subject, object, and you become one. And then from dhyan, it flowers. It's a flowering process. Once you enter into the state of meditation, which is very supremely peaceful and blissful. It's completely unlike your waking experience. Then from there, it flowers into the states of samadhi, and there are many states of God consciousness. And then you begin to expand to realize that you are more and more and more and more. And one of the things that I love that he says is, and there's a lot of people who say, oh, I am God, and that's true, that is true. But I love the way that he says, yes, God is in every fiber of your being, suffuses everything, all of existence. But the question is, how much of you is in him?
Never thought of that.
Right. So you'll know, not based on so Kriya Yoga isn't about some kind of scriptural understanding. It's about direct experience. So we believe that there are 7,200,000,000 religions on the planet. And I could tell you about these things, but until you experience for yourself, it really doesn't matter, And everybody wants to put God into a box.
Yeah.
This is my God box, and my God box is better than your God box. And that's every, most of war that's happened on the planet is because of that. Or it's about money.
Yeah, one of the two.
Yeah.
Right. So is it mostly like a sitting or laying down meditation?
Yeah, it's a way of sitting and focusing what you call the prana or the chi, the life force energy, is focused inside of the spinal cord. So it's a system of breathing. You're not really breathing. Breath is the vehicle for prana. Okay, mm-hmm. So you start off with a breathing technique, but really it's channeling the energy up and down the spine in a really specific way. And what that does is dissolve karma. The karma is located inside of each chakra, and it's a way of rubbing out those seeds of karma, the negative karma. So you may have you may be destined per your past actions to get hurt, get in a car accident, you might be paralyzed, something like that. So by this method, you can actually dissolve those seeds of the negative experience, and maybe you only get a sprained ankle, something like that. And it awakens. As that happens, the Kundalini energy awakens and rises through every center until it merges, in the seventh chakra. And that point, you realize yourself to become the cosmos. Your physical experience is that of the cosmos. And I guess, do we need to tell people what Kundalini is? Because sometimes we talk about that word, we don't know what it is.
I know it's an active meditation, yes?
Well, so there's a Kundalini yoga that was brought here by Yogi Bhajan, who is a Sikh, and he did amazing work. I love Kundalini yoga. Again, in terms of body purification, probably one of the best, so incredible discipline and wonderful practices. But yeah, it's a lot of what they call Kundalini yoga. However, to awaken Kundalini, actually, a stillness has to be achieved. And Kundalini itself it's seen as a serpentine energy that's coiled around the base of the spine 3.5 times. And what it really is, actually, is the remainder of the kinetic energy after the Big Bang. So as the universe starts from an infinitesimal point and explodes to its present size in about less than a billionth of a second, and then the remainder of that energy, if you could imagine the force at which it explodes, the remainder of that energy is called Kundalini. That's the cosmic Kundalini. Now, that exists in a cosmic function and in an individual sense. So it's there's an esoteric concept called the monad. So it's like the microcosm and the macrocosm. It exists in its universal aspect, and it also exists inside of the human body. And it is lying dormant in humans, but you have the power of the universe inside of you, literally. And the process of Kriya Yoga, I think in the, what we call the Gurnath Gita, he says it's the cosmic Kundalini travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. And the human Kundalini, roughly the rate of travel is 90 meters per second. So it's about raising the Kundalini, and then the two merge. And that's one of the reasons why having studying under someone who is already accomplished is so important, because they act as kind of a step down transformer. Because you may have heard of people spontaneously combusting.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but that can happen if you get plugged in directly. If you get directly plugged in, like Kundalini is a really powerful energy, and so a lot of these traditions don't give the full practices because you're not meant to do it without guidance.
So it's like blowing a circuit too quickly.
It's like plugging a 50-watt light bulb into a 50,000-watt transformer, right? So that's why
that's the first time I've ever heard it explained where it actually could possibly make sense to me.
Yeah.
That it's an energy overload.
Yeah.
In a small container.
Yeah, and it can once the Kundalini starts awakening without that guidance, it can be really, it can get weird. It can get really weird.
Did you ever have experiences where like there was too much, too fast?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't want to say too much because I kind of like that.
Yeah,
I'm more of an extremist mindset.
Yeah,
extremist in the sense of I love living on the edge, like that kind of thing. And so I practice really very assiduously, and it can bring about experiences very, very fast. And the good thing also about someone, being under the guidance of one who is fully attained is they can reel you in. I could actually feel myself getting reeled in energetically, like when I started getting those experiences. And in the beginning, because I hadn't done, I would have been better served to have done more of the Kundalini yoga and the Hatha yoga. My body wasn't well prepared to take the voltage, so I had this incredible surge of energy in my hands. I would be shaking, not in a scary way, but because the energy, which is so blissful, it was almost too much. Like the bliss can be orgasmic, can be absolutely orgasmic. It can also be hard to capacitate, and there are techniques in the practice that also help to channelize that energy, so that how can you even function? So there's techniques that allow us to ground, and then so we can go off into the world.
Yeah, I don't think if that were the case for myself, I'd go. I don't think I want to do anything else.
That's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta.
I got to a certain point where all I wanted to do was look at flowers all day, and it's great because at that point, most people think that I have to go and make my life happen, then I can seek God, and I would suggest that the opposite is a more effective path, because everything that you want, all of those desires, stand in the way of your enlightenment. So by doing the counterintuitive thing and seeking enlightenment and expanding your consciousness, as you expand your spiritual, as your aura expands, as your consciousness expands, so too will your mass expand. As your mass expands, your gravity expands. Actually, that's what the word guru means. Guru means gravity, right? So as that happens, all of the situations, all of those desires will come to pass. They'll come to you. I didn't try to go I tried so hard to become a rock star. And when I gave it all up is when all of a sudden I started playing with my heroes. I didn't try. I wasn't trying. And then all of a sudden I'm getting to play with Slash, and I'm getting to play with Jerry Cantrell, and I'm getting to play with all these people, and I didn't try to make that happen. It came to me, because he knows what you want,
No, I was just watching, I don't know why I just thought of this. I was just watching a movie where a guy was wrongfully imprisoned, and he was in there for 20 years. And he had all these appeals that he was doing. And he finally gave up. And he wrote to the governor and he said, you need to, he was in for murder that he didn't do. He said, you need to kill me. I'm done. And so the governor looked at this. He goes, why is this guy who's been appealing for 15, 20 years want to kill himself, want to be, executed? So he had completely given it up. He goes, we need to look into this case. And they looked into it again. And during that time, he'd been incarcerated. DNA advancement had gotten to the point where he was exonerated for the crime and he was freed. But had he not been willing to completely give up his own life, so it's kind of like what you're saying. It's like he went to, like, instead of trying, he stopped trying and just connected to some kind of a truth. In that moment, it was desperation. But it was the thing that freed him.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I talk about with my clients too. I call it chasing the mouse.
Okay.
So it's like when you're trying to get this thing, whether it's a relationship or a lot of people, we're in Hollywood, a lot of people are trying to be actors. Like, I want to kind of make it happen, but with the attachment and the desire to make it happen, which honestly, if you think about it, step back, think about where you are in the cosmos, I mean, the conceit, the conceit of it, like go sit on the ocean and try to make the waves stop, of course it is a paradox because we also have the full expression of divinity. So it's both and it's neither and it's and. But this one principle I notice and I see a lot is when people are trying to make something happen. It's like if you have a mouse and it's a pet mouse and it keeps, every time you go to catch it, it runs into this hole in the wall and it comes out and then you try to grab it again and it runs away. But eventually, if you just sit with a little bit of cheese on your hand or you just sit calmly, eventually it'll come out and it'll come to you. And so sometimes it's the letting go of the attachment, which again, to come full circle, is usually based on to get some kind of need met based on a wrong assumption. Like, right. I make up when I'm a kid, I make up that I'm not enough. Therefore, I need the job, I need the fame, I need this thing outside of myself to prove that I'm okay. And so we keep chasing that thing and it keeps eluding us until we we flip the script and go inside, and then everything will come to you.
I love the irony of that.
It is. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I saw you looking at your time. Are you...
we have a couple more minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Should we segue into some of the activism that you do then?
Sure.
Because I found that really interesting. I watched a video of you at Standing Rock, and I saw the thing you did about banks, which I was really interested in. Actually, both of those. Which do you want to do first?
I guess I would say that the path to activism for me came because I initially was focused entirely on what I call mainstreaming consciousness. In 2009, I began the process of seeing that I had been part of these spiritual communities, all sorts of different spiritual communities, hearing these conversations of how important it was for humanity to unite, how important it was for humanity to overcome our challenges, to move into this new age of peace and enlightenment. And so I saw there was such a disconnect between the consciousness world and the rest of the world that, I spent a lot of time thinking about how could that be bridged? How could we bridge that gap? And so I looked to studying, things like the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell has a lot of principles that I go by, and using how can we hack culture? How can we hack into culture? Because the corporations are using culture to condition us. The media is using culture to condition us. And how can we hack into those principles? And so I started at that point, and, to help mainstream consciousness so that these modalities that I found to be so valuable could be more than just, woo-woo, things that were outside of the realm of acceptability, And from there, that got me into a conversation where I looked deeper into society, and I realized that Washington doesn't really care. Like Washington just doesn't care that we want peace, and so I think what probably activated me was Occupy. Mm-hmm. I got involved in Occupy first. And when Occupy Los Angeles happened, it was everything that I had seen, that it was the beginning of that awakening. And after Occupy for the next 5 years, I got more involved in working with policymakers. And I worked on a bill with Congressman Tim Ryan from Ohio. It was HR 3516, which was bringing health, meditation, holistic modalities to PTSD veterans. And I got more and more involved. And then when the Bernie Sanders campaign came around, it was just all in. And that brought together the most incredible activists in the country. And from that, it was interesting. We were able to support some of the people, our Hollywood friends, to get involved in the Sanders campaign. So we helped, Shailene Woodley, for instance, connect with the campaign or the group that we were in. And then I created a group called Bernie's Avengers, which was a sort of a super team of Bernie surrogates working together on a bunch of different projects. And Shailene was part of that group. And then Shailene got really involved in Standing Rock, and she then enrolled all of us in Standing Rock. And it was such a clear moral imperative. And from them, I also, around that time, the campaign, I also met Josh Fox, who made the movie Gasland. And he had a climate change movie. And I watched that movie. Climate change was never really, I was aware of it, but it was never really my issue. And I watched this movie on climate change, and he brought me on to help him do his HBO launch. And I produced a number of big events at the DNC in LA. And that movie really changed me. And it really showed me what was going on. And at that point, Standing Rock was such a clear moral imperative. It was the intersection of racism, where this pipeline was supposed to go through Bismarck, and the white people said, well, pipelines break, and we really don't want it in our backyard, so why don't you put it through the Indian reservation? And it was such a clear moral imperative. And, so I think a lot of us that were involved in the Bernie campaign, we got involved. And it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, And
you were there for
6 weeks, about 6 weeks. Yeah. We were supporting organizing efforts here. And then even before I went to Standing Rock, I kept thinking strategically. So either way, with whatever, and again, whoever you voted for, it's not really talking about that. But based on my experiences with both parties, it was clear neither party was going to do anything about it. No matter what you believe, neither party was going to do anything about it. And so I started thinking, what can we do? Because anyway, the math doesn't work out either way. Whatever you think about the Democratic Party, make no mistake, like they're very much into fossil fuels. They're very,
absolutely, of course. Yeah.
I was part of the. Mm-hmm. I got to support some efforts at the Democratic Platform, Committee, and the policy advisors for that presidential campaign were fracking lobbyists. So it's uncomfortable truth. It's an uncomfortable truth, but that was the reality. So I started thinking about what in the past has worked, and I remembered. I remember that I went to what was Indigenous Peoples Day, which is now LA has become Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day. And I went to a rally, and a person named George Funmaker, who's become a very good friend of mine, he's Lakota, and he said, "Hey, does anybody have their money in Wells Fargo?" And everyone's kind of quiet. And then he says, "What do you mean? I'm the only one?"
Yeah.
He says, "We got to get our money out of these banks that are funding the pipelines." And then at that moment, I remembered, oh my God, Bank Transfer Day. I remember during Occupy, there was on November 5th, remember the 5th of November, when this campaign was, I remember Bank of America had announced a policy. It was going to be $5 ATM fees or something. And so this woman organized a Facebook invite and a campaign to have people take their money out of the banks and put it into credit unions. And it got so much attention. I think 70,000 people committed, something like that. And it got so much attention, it worked. The bank changed the policy. And I said, oh my God, bank transfer day, that's it. And so I spent a number of weeks trying to convince what we call the nonprofit industrial complex, you know, all the green organizations and the activists. And I said, like, guys, like, let's put this campaign together. And I wasn't getting any traction until part of one of our organizing threads that we have on, I think it was a WhatsApp group at the time. You know, we were getting footage from the front lines. They were sending us drone footage, and you know, we were disseminating that to media outlets. So that was one of the ways we were supporting since August. And one of our brothers at the Young Turks sent us footage of the pipeline reaching the river. So finally, like, the pipe, we were right up against it. And so I just started throwing Hail Marys. And this is it had been the first week of November in 2016. And so I sent a text message to Susan Sarandon, who had participated in Josh Fox's climate revolution. And I sent a text message to Shailene and Susan. And I said, this is what I'd like to do. And Susan replied saying, but I was already thinking about doing that. So that sounds great. So she was already thinking about taking her money out of the banks. I said, great, let's put together a call tomorrow. And mind you, this is within 24 hours. So once Susan was on board, I reached out to, you know, between the text messages and the conversations, there was a really incredible group of people. I reached out to Dennis Kucinich, Alex Ebert, who I'm now working with on a project called Proxy.vote. Alex Ebert from Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, a very gifted filmmaker named Matthew Cook, who made our video. He's an Oscar-nominated director, and Mark Ruffalo was in the conversation. So all these people were in the conversation. And so the idea was that I was going to go to Standing Rock a couple days later. I was going to film I was going to ask the indigenous leadership if that's what they wanted to do. And then if they agreed, I would have filmed their ask, taken it back, and then accessed our influencers here in Hollywood to do the campaign. Well, that was the idea. Of course, the next morning when I talked to Susan, she's like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that sounds great. Except I already booked CNN. I'm going on CNN today. Right? Wow. So then, you know, we were able to generate, between Susan going on TV and Care2 putting it out to their 6 million list, we were able to generate about 40 million impressions in 4 days. And we had 50,000 people committed to taking their money out within 4 days. And since then, it's just continued to grow. The bank, it's called Bank Exit, hashtag Bank Exit.
I watched that video, Bank Exit hashtag?
Yeah, hashtag Bank Exit.
Hashtag Bank Exit. Check that video out, because one of the things that I learned that the credit unions are, they don't make decisions without votes of the membership, which is us, if you're in a credit union, and their interest rates are actually better.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's no reason, I guess, not to do it. Can anyone join a credit union?
Pain in the butt as well. You know, it's kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, I think I was in one once, and I'm not now.
Mm-hmm.
And there was it was a little bit more work in some ways.
Well, it's inconvenient to take your money out of those banks. But what was really cool...
But I got a loan from them, and it was better.
Nice.
Yeah, many years ago.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's, you know, people care about all these issues, and if you don't like immigrant detention centers or corporate prisons or pipelines, or if you don't like these things, really your money is funding them. You know, having our money in those banks fund.
So it's a way that any person can help, even in the tiniest way, and if the more people that do that, the more influence.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have imagined where it would go. What happened after that is the city of Seattle ended up divesting $3 billion from Wells Fargo. And then that inspired a group of young millennials in LA called Divest LA to get together and start pushing, and I was able to, I was invited to come and participate in the last leg of that last couple months of that campaign, where we pushed City Hall to divest $8 billion from Wells Fargo. So Los Angeles now, if you look hashtag Fair Wells Fargo,
yeah, I like that name. Okay.
And so Los Angeles now has divested $8 billion, closed 800 accounts. And the problem was that there was so much business that only the five big banks could handle that. But when through these lobbying efforts, they have unbundled 800 accounts. And so now there's what's called an RFP, a request for proposal. Anyone who wants to get that much business has to have certain standards. We have the highest standards in the country. So if you're invested in pipelines, you're almost immediately disqualified, which is pretty cool. And that was just, people think that the problems of the world are too big for them to do anything about. Like 8 millennials sitting around in a coffee shop.
That's
figured
amazing.
Out how to do this.
That's the Margaret Mead quote right there.
Ben Huck, Trinity Tran, Phoenix Goodman, a bunch of others. Like these are people with not a lot of political experience, not a lot of activist experience, but they sat down and they worked. They got through it. They worked it out, and we all came together, and it was quite a thing. It was really pretty remarkable.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and now the next evolution of that is they're talking about public banking, which is pretty cool.
That would make sense, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So before we close, let's give the people some places to look for more information. One, with your some of the videos that that the man you study with.
Yeah, you can go to siddhanath.org, SIDDHANATH.org, or you can look him. He's got 400, 500 videos on YouTube, which are great.
You'd look under what?
You can look under Yogi Raj.
R-A-J?
Yeah,
okay.
YOGIRAJ, Siddhanath of the same name, and Kriya Yoga, and there's hundreds of videos.
Because I wanted to do that, so that was one reason I asked.
Now you can remember it.
Well, yeah, because I want to get a little more information.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the activist sites or videos.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's right now, the people think Standing Rock is over, but people are now in Louisiana fighting the Bayou Bridge pipeline, which is sort of the end of the Dakota access. So you can look up that. There's still ways to get involved and help out. There's local organizations, Food and Water Watch, 350.org, does great work. There's some amazing indigenous leaders that are doing the work, and it's pretty easy if you just Google some of these things. It's pretty easy to get involved. And if you want to see, just look up hashtag Bank Exit Divest LA on YouTube. There's a bunch of videos, and
head over to the credit union.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone can do it.
And do you have a website people can visit?
I don't. I generally go by word of mouth. I have a Facebook page that's it's Meditate Coaching, MEDIT 8 Coaching. You can look it up.
Okay.
You can if you want to reach out, and I'll do whatever I can to support you.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. Jay Ponti, everybody.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It was a great
really
great
enjoyed talking to you.
It's also difficult. It's interesting to be able to talk about both worlds, these two worlds that are so important. And I'm going to end off with a Yogananda quote.
Great.
For me, what really embodies the principle that I try to live by is, he said that some people, yogis go to the Himalayas and they find their own souls, but they forget about others. And other people spend all their time trying to save the world, but they forget about their own soul. He says self-realization stands for both. And for me, I really try to live like that, I can't do anything unless I unlock the power and the divinity within me. It's consciousness, God, whatever you call that, is the mover. And conversely, what kind of legacy are we going to leave for our children? What kind of and if you think about it from a reincarnation perspective, what kind of world are you going to reincarnate into? Just really appreciate the chance to talk about all this stuff.
Well, thanks so much. That was wonderful. All right. right. Big thanks to you, Jay Ponti. Really enjoyed that. And thanks to you, listeners. I really appreciate you guys coming to the podcast and checking it out. And keep doing that because I got lots of interesting people coming up, and it's my favorite thing to do. Thanks.